All right, we are going to jump into the next part of engagement, which is informed consent. So just to recap, this is the stuff that we've covered so far. Specifically in Monday's class, we walked the client in, we introduced ourselves, did the check-in on feelings, kind of set those expectations of what we expect the client to do, what they can expect from us, doing another check-in on how they're feeling, and then we kind of assess for the resistance and their readiness. Then we kind of jump into the informed consent piece. So here's the cheat sheet that we did. So now, informed consent. So why we do informed consent is because it is actually required in the Code of Ethics. I pulled the ethical standard out, just part of it kind of detailing what needs to be shared, why we need to share it. It's really to protect the client, and it's also to protect the provider as well. One of the big things that we don't want to do is cause harm to our clients. So if they're engaging in services that they're not aware they're engaging in, it can be harmful. Or if they don't like what's going on, they could try to sabotage it by saying the therapist didn't tell them something, et cetera, et cetera. So it just kind of sets the ground rules, the expectations, so covers everyone's bases. So a lot of the content on the checklist for informed consent comes directly from the Code of Ethics because it tells us specifically we need to tell our clients these things in order for them to truly have all the knowledge they need to be able to agree to engage in services. So one of the first things that you're going to want to start out in informed consent. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Why we do this, purpose and structure of the meeting. I should just read the slide instead of going rogue because my brain apparently is trying to jump through the checklist way too fast. So I reflected this in Monday's class that this is often the least favorite part for the client, especially for clients who are really engaged and ready to talk about things because they want to talk. They want to talk about why they're there. They have an agenda, and their agenda is not to listen to you tell them about billing or office hours. It can feel very cumbersome, and at times it can feel like it's not very client focused. So it's very important to frame what you're doing as beneficial to the client and kind of explain like why we go over it, just so you'll know what the expectations are, those kinds of things. If the client, you kind of have to read your client about how much time, like sometimes you can just speed through this for better or for worse. It's not really encouraged. But you kind of read your client's engagement level and kind of this pace that you want to get through everything on it. But no matter how much the client pushes back, you have to complete this at the beginning of every therapeutic relationship. A lot of agencies actually require like a checklist to be completed before the client can schedule next appointment. But even if there's no formal check and balance like that in your agency, you still have to do it as a social work provider. All right, so basically informed consent is just giving the clients the information they need to know so when they're consenting to treatment, they have all the information possible, hence the title, Informed Consent. So one thing that you're going to want to start telling the client is what kind of therapy is offered at your office. So if you're have cognitive behavioral or solution focused, or there's a thing called EMDR, which is rapid eye movement. You just want to kind of detail what they can expect. You don't need to go into like strong detail about it, but just letting them know kind of the parameters of what you practice, because then it kind of lets them know that A, you're qualified, and B, if they're looking for something else, you might not be qualified in that and they may need to start looking elsewhere. Setting parameters if it's individuals, if there's families, if it's groups, kind of the expectation for the size, and how long each session will be. What will happen in session is the next one. So kind of talking about techniques. So like you can explain, like, we'll talk about things. I'll kind of give you some coping skills. If it's more specific, we don't teach the specific things in here because that becomes at the more advanced master's level. This is just the generalist thing. So for the sake of this class, we would just talk about hey, we're going to talk about how you're feeling and kind of identify coping skills, and we'll utilize homework to kind of practice some of the skills and identify different things. So for the generalist practice, you're going to kind of be vague. If you decide to get your master's and go into more of a clinical setting, you will have a different script because you'll actually be trained in specific therapy techniques. Some agencies require a formal treatment plan, making goals and objectives that they have to meet. Largely due to insurance, you have to show insurance that you're working towards a goal. Talking about if there's going to be role plays, if I'm going to give you handouts, practicing mindfulness. If at any time you think you might have a session recorded, you're going to want to tell your client that that might be something that happens. Some agencies require it as part of supervision. Sometimes individual practitioners just want to record them so they can kind of do their review of things. So I would always tell clients, at some point we might have a session be recorded just for supervision purposes. However, I will let you know anytime that that's going to happen, and you have the right to decline that if you want to. I'll never record you without your knowledge. So making sure you clarify that, because it does kind of build the safety. So what is expected of the client? It's kind of touched in a little bit in what is counseling and those specifics. But re-emphasizing that they're the expert in their situation, that this is a partnership, that the therapist or clinician cannot be doing all the work, that there's got to be mutual engagement in there, and that it's empowering and supportive, and that they can expect homework. And again, it's kind of how you phrase homework, making it not seem like a miserable task, but really highlighting the positives of it, that it can help reinforce what we talk about here. It gives you a chance to practice it in real life situations versus just in a therapy session, and it will really help you learn the skills outside of the 55 minutes that we have together. All right, so type of therapy and structure, what will happen, what's expected of the client. Length and cost, so this is more of individually specific to each agency. So for the sake of when you're practicing or when you're making your video, you can just come up with whatever criteria you want in the context, but your agency will give you all that information. So sessions are usually dictated by insurance coverage. So insurance will cover 8 sessions. Then it has to be reevaluated based on clinicians' notes, all that fun things. So I usually just reflect back, okay, your insurance covers 5 sessions. At that time, we'll kind of reevaluate the need. If there's no limitation, you just talk about, we'll assess periodically to see where you're at. The goal isn't to be in therapy forever, but I'm here as long as you need me to support you. We mutually find it beneficial for your goals. You always want to be upfront about the cost. If there's a sliding scale, so that's kind of based on income, or if insurance is covering it, and if you expect payment up front or billing after. Money is a source of anxiety for a lot of individuals, and so clarifying that so they don't have that hanging over their heads. Again, then they know what the expectations are when they agree to treatment. Because let's say they don't know the cost, but you guys form a really good relationship, and all of a sudden, 3-4 sessions down the road, you're making great progress, but you're you have an outstanding bill. I can't see you until you pay it. It can be really interfering to the therapeutic process. You want to check in on what time of the day and days of the week that work good for your client. So let's say that they work every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but those are the only days that you are in the office. Well, this is probably not going to be the most appropriate therapeutic relationship. You might need to find somebody else to kind of that fits their schedule better. So kind of giving them some self-determination in when they want to meet, what time of day, how many sessions they want to schedule in advance, transportation, those types of things. Sometimes it's very helpful to be able to set the same day and the same time every week, it's helpful to remember, kind of get a routine and predictability, but every client is different and they'll be able to tell you what they want. You need to explain your agency's policy on absences and no-shows. Sometimes agencies make you sign paperwork around, in contract around attendance. If not, you just kind of want to have that verbal contract in the agreement and reminder that if they don't show, are they going to be charged, and kind of the expectations around there. Again, every agency is going to be different for the sake of practice in video recording, you just kind of create your own script and make a fictional scenario. All right, so we got type of therapy and structure, what will happen, what's expected of the client, length and cost, time and date, missed absences or missed appointments and absences. And we are getting so close to the end. You want to talk to them about what to do after hours. So if your office is closed, kind of what your policy is for crises that occur after hours. So if your agency has an on-call system in place, make sure they have all that information. If they don't, make sure they have a number for either the 800 number for the crisis line or knowing who to call. So that'd be the hospital, Pine Rest, et cetera, just making sure that they know that they are supported in that, kind of setting that boundary that you might not be the person to provide the support after hours, but making sure they know that their service is available. Strangely enough, you're going to be talking about termination already at the beginning. We're still in engagement, but we're already talking about termination. So you want to prepare the client that eventually this relationship will end. This is a professional relationship. There is a boundary that comes with it. You're not going to necessarily be in their life forever. So that can kind of tie into the conversation about how many sessions you have together, but also just kind of like keeping it on their radar that, you know, eventually this therapeutic relationship will end. We'll keep in communication about it. This is not something that's going to come out of the blue. I'll continue to prepare you as we get closer to that, so you kind of have a game plan of how to support yourself outside of the office and all that fun stuff. Client rights, so letting them know it's okay for them to advocate for themselves if they're feeling uncomfortable. So if they don't like you, they don't like the office, or they're just not comfortable with some element of their services, that they are able to advocate for themselves. They also have access to their records. We talked a little bit about that on Monday, about how you want to be mindful of how you write your clinical notes, because your clients have access to their records. And so sometimes that can be a very therapeutic thing. Sometimes that can be very awkward, but it is a client right. Hipaa, which is Health Information Protection and Privacy Act. I think I got that right, but I'm not sure. Essentially, that is the federal law where you cannot disclose information about your client to others without their permission. They have to give written permission for other people to access their records. The only exception is a guardian and if there is like a police necessity. But we'll talk about confidentiality in a few slides. There's some limitations around that. But overall, the expectation is you cannot disclose any of their medical or clinical information without their written permission. And they have the right to request a change in social worker. Now, sometimes agency policies will be different. You can't just request and get what you want because it might be a sabotage method for their services. So if they don't like that you're pushing too hard or don't like what you have to say, often clients will want to avoid going deeper, doing those difficult conversations, and they'll request a new social worker, and that might be denied because it's not beneficial. But usually a supervisor gets pulled in and kind of has conversations with the client, but they do have the right to request it. Agency is not obligated to honor it without exploring other options first. All right, so we'll look through these again. So type of structure in therapy, what will happen in session, what's expected of the client, length and cost, time and dates, missed appointments and absences, after hours support, termination, and the client rights. That is so much information. So sometimes it is helpful to even show the client that you have a checklist, because it lets them know that there's an end in sight of all the information that you're giving. Sometimes your agency will have paperwork they actually have to sign around these different points that they were given the information about it. So that can be kind of a checkpoint. I would always suggest that anytime if you're reading the nonverbals of a client and they feel like they are checking out, do those check-ins, be like, how are you feeling? Do you have any questions? Or even just validating, like, this is a lot of information to take in. If you have a question that pops up later, please let me know and kind of validate that this might be an overwhelming or a not fun experience to navigate. You do not have to go in the order that I listed them in. You're going to figure out your own song and dance and your own flow, but you want to hit all of this content in some shape or form throughout your informed consent